welcome to Trader Talk TV. I'm Lindsay Roundtree from Exchange Wire, and today I am delighted to be joined by Quantcast CTO Peter Day. Hello, Peter. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. Great to be here.
Great to have you here. And today we're talking about the Quantcast platform, what it is, what it does, and why it exists, why it was built in the first place. But before we kick off with that, while I'd be very surprised if people haven't heard of who Quantcast are, you guys do quite a lot of stuff, so it'd be good to kind of give a brief overview of what it is that you guys do and kind of what you're known for.
Yeah, sure. We think of ourselves as an audience intelligence company. We work with brands, agencies, publishers to really help them understand, reach, and influence people wherever they are, kind of digitally.
Excellent, thank you. So the Quantcast platform. There's been a big, it's launched recently, as in its current iteration. I'd love to understand, obviously want to know what exactly it does, but before we kick off with that, kind of what is the platform and why was it built?
Yeah, so the platform is our kind of latest big release, if you like, and it's really the culmination of a lot of the things that we've been working on at Quantcast since our inception, really, 12 or 13 years ago, but really putting all of that directly in our customers' hands. It was really built in response to frustration we heard from publishers, agencies and advertisers a few years ago, and when everyone was complaining that all the money was going into the walled gardens, and specifically kind of social media and Facebook and things. And we spent a bunch of time trying to understand why that was. And really it came down to a couple of things. Firstly was that it was easy to spend money there, and secondly was that it worked. And so we really tried to make it true with our platform, that you could understand, reach and influence audiences as effectively on the open internet as you can in those kind of social channels. And it should be about as easy to do as well. So really that was what the Quantcast platform was there to do, was to go level the playing field, if you like, for the open internet relative to some of those walled gardens.
Trying to give brands agencies another option, an easy option, because it comes down to ease a lot of the time, doesn't it? It really does.
Yeah, I think so. I think, executing effectively on the open internet today sometimes requires like a PhD in programmatic, right? It's just too hard. And, all the different pieces of technology that are needed. And so, as an exec at one of the big agencies told me many years ago, if someone's got £100,000 to spend on a Friday afternoon, they're not calling up The Guardian, right? They dump it into Facebook. But, to be fair to Facebook, it's got nice high fidelity audiences. It's easy to understand what's going on there to an extent, I'd say. And you can use it to execute your marketing tactics without having to care deeply about how the pipes work. And so this is what we've been trying to make true, as I say, to level the playing field so the open internet has an alternative that is as easy to kind of get your marketing kind of tactics executed in.
Speaking of how these things work, as you say, that people don't necessarily care about that, they care about ease of use and does it do what I need to do for myself or my client? I am fascinated to understand though how it works and kind of upon what it was built.
Yeah, so we're super privileged at Quantcast. I'm super privileged as a CTO of Quantcast to have over a decade of experience at kind of ingesting and making sense of data and partnerships with now over 100 million web destinations use our kind of analytics technology.
Wow.
To kind of help them, again, understand their audiences. But we're able to kind of leverage that data and organize it in a way that, brands and publishers can kind of understand. And so a lot of it starts with our ability to kind of, partner with a large set of publishers, from the biggest publishers in the world, right the way down to my mum's blog, and help organize all that information in a way that, people can understand and make sense of. And, everything kind of stems from there.
Brilliant. You mentioned the data points that exist in the platform. How do you make sense of that data?
Right. So, obviously, I've got a wonderful whiteboard in front of me because I'm an engineer at heart still. I say it all starts with data. And when we're talking about data, what we really mean is this kind of noisy, messy data that is available in digital. So we start with this. And this is kind of often kind of fairly abstract stuff. So the URL that someone's looking at right now. And it might be within the same domain, the pages they were looking at a few minutes ago. So last couple of URLs. When you're trying to make sense of an advertising opportunity, you might have something like a deal involved in this. So you need to kind of make sense of any sort of deal you might have in place with that publisher. You need to make sense of we all care about supply paths right now. So which path do you have between your buying platform, in this case Quantcast, and a specific publisher? You might also care about things like, geography, where someone is in the world, and you might care about the format and the size and all sorts of other information. Now, all this information by itself is completely independent somewhat, and it's completely unique for every individual opportunity you have to show someone an ad. Right? So you've got all these different kind of discrete data points, and it's our job to kind of make sense of all of that. And to do that, we have to use modeling, to make sense of this data. So, for example, making sense of a URL, what does that mean to make sense of a URL? Now, when we think about making sense of a URL, we have the privilege and the advantage of the fact that we've got this amazingly diverse internet full of wonderful and weird content that's full of wonderful things like text and images and videos and things like that. And so as humans, we kind of make sense of it by reading it. And increasingly now, we're kind of making sense of the internet by reading it, by which I mean we have crawlers that go out over the entire internet, scan the text of pages, subtitle some videos and things like this, and we kind of make sense of the internet in a way that, that a human might. And that helps us organize every URL into something we call topic space. So the computers and our machines and our machine learning technology can kind of make sense of the internet. So the first step to make sense of data is to kind of enrich this data with other patterns that we see. So to give you an example of that, this here, these blue dots here, every one of these dots is an individual URL. So there's some sort of ministryofcurry.com there, and there'll be other cooking stuff near here, right? And so every one of these dots is an individual URL, and its position in space is dictated by the content of the page. And all this is doing is giving the computers a mathematical understanding of the internet so that we can kind of think of the internet as positions in space. And this allows us to enrich something as abstract as an individual URL with parameters, specifically coordinates, that help us kind of make sense of it. So the first step in terms of kind of making sense of the internet, if you like, from an advertising perspective, is to understand things like URLs and pages and content, and understand it specifically in a way that computers can kind of understand. And computers are mathematical beasts, so they like to have numbers associated with things. And so here we can say, now how similar is this to other pages that have kind of worked for us in the past, or the opposite of that, which areas of the internet down here we might not be happy with showing ads in because they're brand unsafe. You can reframe that entire question as, don't show ads in that part of town. It's a bit dodgy down by the train station. And again, we can give the computers understanding of the internet and things like this. So everything starts with data and then enrichment based on kind of models which can help make sense of that. Does that make some sense, or have I lost everybody yet?
Makes a lot of sense to me. I'm just mesmerized by that ecosystem map, the space galaxy you've just created there.
Right. It's useful. Now, in reality, of course, these models are far bigger than we can visualize. They're in hundreds of dimensions, and we can only visualize 3 with our visual cortex. And there's many tens of millions, hundreds of millions of points at this point. But it's a useful way to think about how computers must think about things.
Absolutely.
And so we start with this kind of raw data. We kind of enrich it with more information based on historic observations in the case of deals and so on and so forth. And contextual information and behavior and topic information and things like this, which again try and find more general patterns in data. In order to then turn that into an advertising decision, that's kind of cool and it's interesting, but it's not really sufficient. To turn it into an advertising kind of decision, the next stage is to make a bunch of predictions. And these predictions are really, how valuable is this impression going to be to my advertising campaign? Right, and that will vary campaign by campaign. Like one advertising impression might be super valuable if I was trying to sell an SUV, but it'd be completely useless if I was trying to, raise awareness for, some skis or something. These are really bad examples, but you get the point. The value of this kind of impression that we're kind of considering here is not, is going to be very, very unique to the specific objectives of my campaign. So before we even get to the predictions, the first thing that we actually start from is the outcomes we want to achieve. And when we think about outcomes from campaigns, we really think about, what is the objective that we're really trying to achieve? And so if you look at the Quantcast platform today, you will notice this is also true in a lot of the walled gardens. The first thing you get asked for isn't some targeting parameters, it's what is the outcome you want to achieve? And the reason all of these platforms start with the outcome is because if you know what the outcome is and you've got some sort of measurable outcome, you can kind of get machines to automatically optimize millions of parameters to help you achieve that outcome. So a lot of the framing of the walled gardens, be it, Instagram or Snap or Facebook, and also the Quantcast platform, the way that we start with our advertising campaigns is to start framing the outcome. And that can be a performance outcome, as in I want to sell more stuff. It could be kind of mid-funnel tactics, like driving people to my site. Or it could be, I want to reach this specific audience, and I make sure they all see the ad about 5 times over the course of 7 days. All of these are kind of measurable outcomes. You do need it to be a measurable outcome if you're going to optimize directly towards it. But this is where we start with everything. And often these days, advertising campaigns have a few different kind of outcomes. They might have, I want let's take a really simple case. I want a low CPA. I want a low cost per acquisition. This is my primary objective of my campaign. But I've also got these other outcomes that I need to achieve because I've got some nice hygiene criteria. So I might say, I also want viewability as measured by, let's say, Moat to be 70%. It's a little bit high for a performance campaign, but let's say these are the outcomes of my campaign. And often there's other ones as well, but we'll start with those two. And the big question for any platform is, how do you connect this data, these kind of abstract data points, which might be enriched using models and so on and so forth to find more general patterns and things. How do you tie that to outcomes? And this is where predictions come in. And so a lot of what our technology does behind the scenes is take this kind of data set, and for every single campaign, there are specific models whose job it is to predict how much this individual impression will influence its outcome. So what we mean by this is we'll have one model that says, what is the probability that someone will convert if this is a lower funnel campaign? We'll have another model that say, what is the probability that that this ad will be viewed as measured by Moat? Okay. So one of the big things that we do behind the scenes is we're constantly retraining these models based on millions of data points to say, given this ad opportunity, given everything we know about it, given everything we've enriched it with, what's the probability here? Let's say this might be 2%. And the probability that it's going to be viewed as measured by Moat in this case is 40%. So one of the big steps that you have to take in this type of approach is you start with data, you enrich it, then you have a whole bunch of predictions which give you a set of probabilities. And those predictions are about how are really kind of helping you infer of all of the outcomes and constraints of my campaign. Is this individual impression likely to help me or hurt me? And so that's the next kind of big step that you need to take. And all of the kind of walled garden platforms are kind of doing this behind the scenes when they're kind of helping you achieve your objectives. And we're certainly doing that inside the Quantcast platform.
And so, I mean, you're absolutely right that the majority of the walled garden platforms now encourage you to operate from an outcomes basis and start where you want to end up. What about for those buyers that still like to have that element of control and still want to be able to go in and go, I want to do this, this, and this. The outcomes will be determined later on. How about kind of those kind of buying styles, or is it very much trying to kind of move people away from that? Because actually, the way that you want to use the data dictates that the starting with an outcomes perspective obviously makes the most sense and will get you the greatest outcome, of course.
Yeah, I think I think my belief is that computers are always going to be better at in the weeds kind of parameter optimization than humans will ever be. So I really don't think you want humans going in there and saying, adding URLs to lists and upweighting and downweighting different URLs. I just think humans would be terrible at that. However, I think, certainly we're adding more capabilities to our platform to give people an element of control about the type, the people who see their ads, where their ads are seen, this kind of stuff. So there's a bunch of other outcomes you can add to this list. Things like, frequency targets, rather than something, people, in programmatic, people are used to controlling things like frequency caps, which are a terrible, proxy for what people really want. When we think about outcomes, we really think about anything that's to do with that portfolio of impressions, as in, some hygiene criteria. I want the vast majority of people to see the ad between 3 and 7 times. Right, that's a really nicely framed outcome. That's something a computer behind the scenes could have optimized towards. It's not some sort of arbitrarily hard frequency cap of 9, meaning the majority of people only see 1 ad and a bunch of people see 9 ads, right? But, I think it's really important that you allow the computers to do the kind of in the weeds parameter tweaking, because they're really good at that. And I think humans are really good at kind of understanding broader context ideating, all that other kind of wonderful stuff. But it does mean that they need to control things in a slightly different way. It's not about maintaining a list of URLs. It's optimizing kind of outcomes, objectives, constraints, these kinds of things. And the ideal solution is that computers, when you dig deep into the weeds of what the computer's actually done in terms of spending your money, you're pleasantly surprised, not deeply shocked. And that's why, the sophistication of the technologies that's being used and the robustness is actually really important, because it's, when you automate these things, obviously there's the risk that you could get it wrong. So you do need to spend a lot of time kind of thinking, carefully and considering how your systems are set up to make sure that it remains true, that you're pleasantly surprised with the fact that your computers make smart decisions.
Yeah, excellent point. And you referred to it earlier as messy data. How is this data different from how I would normally be buying or targeting segmenting my audiences?
Right. So, I mean, a lot of data, unfortunately, it still shocks me. A lot of data today is these kind of pre-packaged segments.
Yeah.
Right. So instead of this kind of raw data that's a bit messy and most of it's completely useless for most use cases, that's then turned into a set of predictions, you've kind of binarized the world into some sort of segment, right? Which is like some third party who might not even know who they are and how they collect their data has said this person is in market for an SUV, right? So the alternate approach, if you like, is to say I've got third party data and I've got somebody telling me this is in market for SUV. And this is just some sort of user ID typically. I think we all know what's happening with user IDs at the moment. It's not looking good for them. But in market for SUV, user ABC123 is in that segment. Right? And this is how a lot of people, unfortunately, today still think about data. They think about somebody has somehow come up with this segment. They don't tell you how they've inferred that someone is in market for an SUV, but they're then in this list. And it's completely binary. It misses all of the nuance of what someone might be looking at right now, what someone was looking at a few minutes ago. It's several days old. Most of these cookies are, the ones that are transmitted through the ecosystem tend to be the older ones. And this is kind of how, unfortunately, people are buying today. It doesn't have these nice probabilities associated with it, so it struggles to scale. You don't know the provenance of it, and it tends to be very, very stale as well. And also a lot of different companies are all buying these same segments, meaning there's a huge amount of competition for these kind of highly trackable audiences that happen to be in a lot of segments. So it tends to drive the price up a lot as well. So this is the kind of more traditional way of buying. You delegate your making sense of data to a third party, who then reduces all of the complexity of human behavior and how they're looking at the internet and how they're moving around the internet, what they're looking at right now, into a list of user IDs. And then I target those user IDs in the hope that I can get some sort of outcome. Now, I don't know how anyone can make that perform. I'm impressed that people do, but because it lacks nuance, it lacks decent provenance of information, and it very much binarizes the world. And so you end up having to overlay all sorts of other things with this segmentation to kind of make sense of it. And then you've got these poor humans in the weeds, kind of upweighting and downweighting constantly, trying to turn what is a fairly crude approximation of whether someone's likely to be a market for an SUV or not into some sort of arbitrary binary segment.
Interesting. And you mentioned the future of user IDs, and obviously that being very much in question. And Apple yesterday released more further information about their plans to make that even more challenging for marketers. How about how can buyers operate this in a post-cookie world? Kind of how can they measure how is this platform geared up for a post-cookie world?
Yeah, I mean the good news is, even with the most recent Apple announcements, is there's no shocks here. I mean,
certainly not. No,
there's a fairly steady trend towards privacy legislation from governments, things like GDPR. To people, the big tech platforms stop, also having an opinion on how data can be shared and what data should be shared and things like this. So I mean, this is the reason when we built the Quantcast platform, we said no to third-party data, because I couldn't see a way that there was going to be any scale in third-party data kind of long term. It just didn't make any sense to me with all of the trends that we saw at the time. It's why we doubled down on the publisher side of our business. We initially launched something at the time we called Q for Publishers. That's now the publisher side of our platform, and first-party data, things that we could directly observe. It's why we invented technology to crawl the internet and organize it and make sense of it, kind of in terms of topics, because that's information that's going to be super valuable in worlds without any sort of scaled third-party data at all, and it's kind of segmentation of the audiences. And it's why we've really invested in our direct integrations with publishers to make sure we can help them understand their own audiences, increasingly package up their own audiences. We've got capabilities coming for that in just a couple of months to help our publishers curate their audiences based on their first-party understanding of those, but make them discoverable and buyable and measurable by advertisers. So in order to kind of make sense of audiences in the future without things like cookies and without things like IP addresses, you need to be able to process a multitude of different signals and make sense of those. And they're going to be different by different platforms. It's not going to be consistent. This idea of consistent standards, I think, went away with the latest Apple announcement. And so you kind of necessarily, I think, need to get closer to the raw data. You need to be finding patterns and making sense of that raw data. And some of that data is going to be less available. So you need to deal with the unknown a little bit more. You can't just rely on somebody else pre-packaging segments for you. You need to be, making sense of contextual information alongside some on-publisher site, behavioral information, alongside some pre-packaged audiences from publishers, alongside all your geo signals and things like this, in order to kind of deal with this new messier internet that isn't as neat as it used to be, or neat as we used to pretend it was.
Do you want to try and make it neat, or are you happy that it's messy?
I think we're doing a good job. I'm slightly biased here at making it a bit neat, but under the covers, it's really hard, right? We've invested many tens of millions of dollars at this point over the last few years. In fact, it's way larger than that, as my CFO keeps telling me, in trying to organise this messy information. In the same way that Google organises the whole world's information for search, we've been trying to do all of this for advertising. How can we organize the internet and the addressable opportunities and the deals and the publishers and these other random audiences in ways that marketers can kind of understand? And we've really focused super hard with our amazing design team and product team in trying to, not expose our end users, our marketers, to that messiness, and say, look, if you just want to reach people who are, expecting kids, you should be able to do that as easily on the open internet as you can on Facebook. That means that we take responsibility for making sense of this kind of increasingly messy internet.
I think it's an interesting point, though, actually, that you raise about messy versus the cleanliness that maybe currently exists, and how cookies help to foster that to a large degree, and the reason why buyers like to have this control over how they plan and buy campaigns is because it's ordered and it makes sense to them at the moment. But in this new world, it isn't going to make sense. So how can they maintain that control and not feel like they're buying from some random black box solution? Actually, it will be platforms like this that will help them do that. And I guess the interesting thing for me is I guess the live aspect of this data. You mentioned kind of stale data previously. Kind of, is it that the connections you have with these publishers, the first party aspect, means that they can there feels like a more of a real time aspect to what they're able to do here?
That's exactly right. I'd say I feel super smart right now. Maybe it's partly luck in terms of the investments that we've made over recent years to prepare for this. But absolutely. If you think about just quickly show you rather than waffle on about it, but when I talk about organizing audiences in a kind of real-time fashion, again, everything we've done on our platform, we set the bar as how easy is it to do on Facebook and Snap, right? In terms of being able to navigate and activate and do all those other kind of things. And so, while it's really complex under the covers, if I want to find an audience who are, say, looking at family and parenting content online, I should be able to navigate and explore that audience really quickly. Right, and everything should just be intuitive and easy to use. I shouldn't need a 6-week training course just to be able to reach people who are interested in family and parenting content online. What I'm actually doing behind the scenes here is I'm using this massive contextual model of the internet where we've classified every single URL and said, well, these pages we think, based on the content of the pages, are about family and parenting content. But I don't want marketers to have a degree in machine learning or have done a data science course. They're going to make sense of this and understand it. It should just be intuitive and easy to use, as it is in the walled gardens. And so what we've done there is that we've created an audience that people are interested in family and parenting content. We can also say, look, I'm really interested in young people based on inferences we can make based on first-party data, young people who are looking at family and parenting content online, who basically we don't think have kids in the household today. Now, the statistics used and the modeling used to do this behind the scenes, it's insanely complex, but I don't think marketers should care about that. It's not their skill set. They need to care about, okay, I'm interested in this younger audience. They're interested in family and parenting content online. What else is true about them? What else are they looking at? What topics are they consuming online? As in, what language is near where they're hanging around in that part of topic space, right? Let's validate this is the audience I'm after. And then maybe I want to do some direct deals with publishers, right? On the publisher side of our platform, maybe here's some publishers I might not have seen before, whattoexpect.com. I can buy them direct, maybe run a high impact format against them. So a lot of complexity under the covers, but great technology, as a wise man once said, is about making simple things simple and complex things possible. Great technology should make it simple for me to define an expectant parents audience, do some high impact advertising by connecting directly with publishers, run programmatic execution, and have that all presented alongside each other and get those kind of campaigns live within a few minutes, and then be able to monitor them really quickly in terms of seeing what's happening in terms of driving behavior and all that other kind of wonderful stuff that we're going to use to in programmatic and the new digital era. So absolutely, real time super important, fidelity of information is super important, but so is how do you organize all this disparate noisy data in ways that marketers can understand.
Love it. It looks great. I mean, I guess there's a few pillars here, aren't there? It's this use of data that enables people to kind of move away from the liars and the cookie and actually be able to target more effectively, and as you say, not use stale data, but also it looks like it's the ease of use and the ability to try to replicate what traders are used to on the bigger walled garden platforms that make their lives so much easier. Bringing that to them is probably ultimately what the key thing for them is. If they can save time doing that kind of stuff, they have more time doing the fun strategic stuff.
Yeah, I think it's actually a phrase that we use quite a lot at Quantcast is your rate of innovation and forward progress is directly proportional to your speed of iteration. By which we mean how quickly can you ideate, get something live, make sure it's been executed as you intended, and then measure success. If you can shorten that loop between ideation and successful measurement, then you can try more ideas. And if you can try more ideas, you tend to drive more innovation and progress. And so really ease of use is not about kind of, it's not really about cost cutting or anything like that. It's about how quickly can we innovate. And you see that in the walled gardens. People do amazing things with what's effectively a limited format in areas like Instagram and Facebook, right? And it kind of works for them. A lot of innovation in terms of how do we reach and influence people using this format. And part of the reason for that is because it's so easy. It's lowered the kind of the barrier to entry. More people can try it, but also more importantly, people can test and learn more quickly. And if you can test and learn more quickly, you tend to be able to innovate more quickly, and therefore you tend to end up with greater results.
Brilliant. That feels like a good note to end on. I want to say thank you very much. It's been absolutely fascinating. It's great to see kind of deep data used and modeled in a different way from how we're kind of so traditionally used to buying it. Thank you so much for joining us today, Peter.
Thank you for having me.
This has been Trader Talk TV, and we'll see you next time.